Hello everyone from Yonkers Voice. Today we're sitting here with Mr. Nader Sayegh, a man of his word. We've been talking to Mr. Nader since, about 2 months now?
Since July.
Since your endorsement?
Yeah, since July.
And Mr. Nader always said that he would debate whoever, and he kept his word.
Okay? That's correct.
Today we had scheduled a debate between Mr. Nader and Mr. Pinion, a debate that Mr. Pinion asked for, but unfortunately he was not able to make it. And part of the deal was whoever showed up had the floor, and Mr. Nader showed up. Not in the setting that we hoped, but you're here.
But any setting, Ru, that expands communication. And I know you've been in the forefront of advocating and believing, and the public deserves to know. And especially when there's campaigns, there's political elections, the public needs to be aware. And any opportunity, whether it's through this forum or through conferences and candidates' nights, these are good opportunities. I myself expanded my platform by communicating to the general public, the voting public, and any opportunity for me to speak about who I am and my campaign and how I am deserving of being the assemblyman for the 90th assembly seat, I welcome those opportunities. So thank you very much for your civic duties and your efforts to really mobilize public opinion.
Thank you, Mr. Nader. But now let's get to what really matters.
Sure.
Let's just start by, what do you think is the difference between you and your opponent?
Good question. I often go to conferences and meetings and public candidate forums, and I explain to the voting public, your job is to elect the most qualified individuals to represent you. Because when we see the issues that confront our community, the lack of funding for education, small businesses that are having difficulty surviving, taxes on homeowners increasing at 6.2%, and you look at quality of life issues, every voter should be concerned as to who goes to Albany to represent them. Why? Because the role of Albany and Yonkers is crucial. Because in my seat, the 90th, my main job as an assemblyman is to represent only Yonkers, 100% Yonkers. And Yonkers is treated so unfairly when it comes to the state aid formula, the building fund formula, and a lot of other issues that really deprive us of the adequate funding. So when they do that, the city council and the local administration has to come into fold and pay the difference to avoid layoffs and cuts in services and education and other areas, and therefore taxes are increased. Now, in response to your question, why me? Because Nader Sayegh not only knows Yonkers, I've been in Yonkers 60 years. I grew up in Southwest Yonkers. I'm a small businessman. I'm an educator for 35 years. When I look at 40 years of involvement in Yonkers, I look at my role on hospital boards, on civic organizations, on cultural organizations, on youth and senior citizens and law enforcement. I've dealt with it for 40 years, and I'll tell you that I've never gained a dime. God knows how much it costs me in time and effort, but that's my commitment to my community. I live here. We grew up 8 brothers and sisters. We were educated in the Yonkers public schools. I say to my opponent, it's great to tell the public about all the problems, and all of us know what the problems are. We know what we're faced with. What the public and the voting public wants to know, fine, we know what the problems are. Why you? What skills, what activity, what have you done as a candidate that is deserving of our vote? What have you done in healthcare? What have you done in education? Have you served on any committees? Have you served on any boards? Have you shown us that you really care? Or is it just all of a sudden somebody said run for office and now you want to talk about all the problems? I feel that I have the experience, my law degree, my educational degree, my knowledge of community needs, what is important, gives me the skills to go up to Albany immediately. I don't need to be trained by anyone else. I don't need to learn the process of. I've been to Albany already, debating with parents and administrators, with PTA. We went up bus loads.
Okay, Mr. Nader, but let me just interject here. A lot of people in Yonkers, the voters, those that are really going to go there and vote for you or your opposition, they're tired of this business. It's Albany when it comes to education.
Yeah.
Okay, it's Albany. It's the formula. It's the mismanagement in Yonkers. What is the problem? What is it?
I'll tell you what the problem is. It's a combination. It's a combination of a lack of proper funding from Albany. So people that say, well, you can't change, there's been improvements the last 5 years. For example, the building fund went up from 50 to 70% now. We're arguing, fine, we appreciate the increase, but we should be closer to 98% what they give Albany and other big cities, number one. Number two, 20 years ago, we used to, in Yonkers, beg developers to come and build here and give them IDA grants and tax grants and credits and so forth. Now, the big talk is Yonkers is the next Brooklyn. So now you have developers knocking on our doors and they're outbidding each other. So I'm saying the state formula with development in Yonkers, now let's make sure they pay their rightful share. For example, Empire Casino. We get a host amount of money of $9.6 million for God knows 12 years now. Now they're looking to sell to MGM. MGM is looking to expand their operation, which gives us an opportunity to say to MGM and other developers that are bidding, you better pay your rightful share. We're not giving away the store like we did for many years. And those extra funds that are designated to education and community fill the void. What we need is sustainable income. And the third component to that, and we all say, people talk about the city administration and their role and their responsibility. I believe that the portion that the city gives to education should be increased. So if the city gets additional benefits, it's been historically 50%, 50%. And I really believe at some point we got to start making the shift where the city gives 60% of whatever their budget to education, and they really don't need more than 40% for the municipal side. That's a long-term plan that's realistic. If you look at New Jersey, about 2 months ago, Governor Murphy, New Jersey, did an overhaul of the entire New Jersey education funding formula. And he did it because the state of New Jersey had inequitable funding, where poor school districts weren't getting what rich districts get. And I believe we're no different in New York State. I think the funding formula right next door to us in New Jersey, there was a major change, the entire state, and New York needs to do the same. Our legislators that fought very hard, and they brought us a lot of funding over the years, but the concept of you can't change it, I think there was an issue with how we packaged it. We sold it as a Yonkers plan when it needs to be a statewide change, so you can lobby support.
Yeah, Mr. Nader, now I have to ask a question that someone asked me to ask you.
Okay.
Education. You are a man that's been in the education business for many years. That's actually where I met you.
Yes.
20-some years ago. We know that Dr. Quesada was appointed. You were one of those who voted in favor of Dr. Quesada.
Yes.
The other day we asked around to the people, how is Dr. Quesada doing? Most people give their McCain fist down. How you feel about Mr. Quesada now?
Well, you have to look at the big picture.
Tell us about it.
And I understand the public at large, issues come up, such as the mold issue at school,
Correct.
15, and there's a lot of other issues. Asbestos. But you got to realize, as a school district, even before Dr. Quesada came into play, we always had an issue with our buildings. We had an issue where we've been arguing with the state that changed the formula that allows us to build new schools and extend and renovate. Yonkers is one of the only districts that has increase in enrollment. You look at Buffalo, they practically rebuilt the entire Buffalo school district, new facilities, and they have decrease in enrollment. Here we are, since I've been on the board, this is my 6th year, we went up from 21,000 kids, now we're close to 27,000 kids. So from that perspective, I agree the public has a right to know about the condition of buildings, and I think we made a point of saying, yes, we know we have old buildings, some of them are crumbling, and we want to keep our children safe and healthy. From that perspective, there's anger. But then you look at, for example, a program recently I attended, My Brother's Keeper, that dealt with minority children, and there was like 500 people at the Castle Royale, and 500 business people, investors, the whole community at large looking to help children. Then you look at the graduation rate that went up from 70% to 86% this past school year. Among an urban school district like we are, that's not only above the state average, it's one of the best in urban America. So although people rightfully have concerns about the administration, and we know whenever there's a problem, there's an issue, the public at large gets upset with who the leaders are. But I always say, look at the big picture. Are there concerns? Yes. Are there issues? Yes. Me as a member of the Board of Education, I'm one of 9 members. And there's times when there's disagreement and there's concern. But I have to say, look at the overall job, look at the success of students, and that should be the determining factor.
Now let's move into another subject, and let's look at your audience. That's where your audience are, and they need to hear from you. What about in regards to incentives that the city is giving to all these investors? $21 million to Exxon, I believe, of course, in a period of time. But do you think it's time to stop those incentives?
Oh yeah, definitely. Like I said earlier, when we're talking about how do you address our long-term needs, because what the public and what I feel is correct is there should be a change in this pattern where year after year Yonkers goes up and begs for more money. It's frustrating. If you work in the school district, you're a teacher, you're a custodian, you're a member of the school establishment, it's frustrating that year after year you worry about sports being cut and support services and special ed services, right, and music and art and library. This is terrible because the state puts unfunded mandates and they say, well, we want you to do A, B, C, D, but you come up with the funding. We want more security, but you come up with the funding. We want more safety in this area and that area, but you come up with the funding. That's not fair. Local communities are having a very difficult time. And then with the state cap on taxation and so forth, that puts a really difficult stress on local school districts. The lottery funding that was intended many years ago to fund education. And I started looking at it where it's up to like $10 billion a year, right, of lotto funding. And when you find out and you start studying the specifics and you find out no more than 34% of that goes into education where they split it up. Even though the formula is wrong, but even on the initial stages of 10 billion and only 34% of that max goes back to public education, that's something that needs overhaul on the state level. When you look at the funding formula and you study the numbers, you know what the difference is that we get, unlike other big cities? They get on the average $12,000 per kid, and we get on the average $7,000 per kid. Imagine that $5,000 every single year per child times 27,000 kids. That would resolve our problems, right? So that's why the public needs to understand, the old story of don't bother, no bother. Because even if they don't completely change the formula, there's been positive trends that have come about through this extensive lobbying. So we need to lobby for an overhaul, but at the same time, let's not give up on the battle.
Right.
We need the investors to be held accountable to pay their rightful share of taxes. I agree. They should be held responsible to making sure when they hire employees, there's prevailing wages. When they hire When the developers get involved, we should sit down, negotiate with them to make sure they hire from the community at least a certain percentage. You need to mobilize the community, not just to have the developers and their special interest benefit.
Now, just a question related to that. We have a building in Yonkers. The old city jail was purchased, huge incentive. They were going to do this, they're going to hire people from the city. When the building is done, the place was going to be used by the community for the art shows and whatever. None of that happened.
None of it?
None of that happened. What resources do you think the city should have once we give incentives, and then once the job is completed, none of the things are fulfilled?
That's a good point. You know, when agreements are made, you have to have a system in place or individuals that are held responsible to make sure that they hold these developers and hold them and give them accountability. They need to make sure if a commitment was made, then there should be a pullback on incentives, and there should be an agreement on the initial stages that this is what we agreed upon, this is the incentives we're giving you. But if you don't comply within an established period of time, and it becomes unreasonable, then at that point we have a right to break the agreement and hold you responsible for your share of taxes.
I would think that our city would think about that and have this agreement in place. And
yeah.
But now, Latinos, sooner or later, the Latino population will have the power to decide the landscape of the political field in the United States. What do you think are the priorities for the Latino community that might be thinking about, should I vote for Mr. Nader or should I vote for Mr. Joe Pinion? What do you have to tell them?
Well, I think as in any ethnic group, any racial group, I grew up in a family where we valued education, we valued job development, creating jobs, good working jobs, and special emphasis on the family structure to make sure the family follows traditional values. I believe that for the Latino community as well as all other communities, they need to focus continuously on a good quality education. When you look at the Yonkers Public Schools, for example, nearly 60% of our students are of Latino background. When I talked earlier about the graduation being 86%, that's reflective of the accomplishments among other groups that Latino children and English language learners have achieved in Yonkers. So I would focus on establishing greater collaboration among the Latino community. I myself, over 25 years ago, served on the Spanish Foundation Board of Trustees. So I value the importance of providing adequate services in housing, community services, health care, and education. And I think city municipalities and state need to encourage the Latino population, and representatives that are Latino and those that are active need to understand they need more collaborative efforts. What really hurts any ethnic group is when there's division. It's always fine to have a difference of opinion, but at the end of the day, the recognition that at the end of the day, let's have dialogue, let's communicate. We may agree and disagree on strategies, but there should be a common agenda that addresses what's important for our community. What's important is voter registration, making sure your voice is heard, making sure members of the community serve on every board and commission, making sure they attend Board of Ed meetings and they attend City Hall meetings and they voice their concerns, and they elect individuals that they feel can best address those issues. That's my recommendation.
So let's look at the camera and explain to our community and people around, okay, how important it is to vote. Because all of us complain about this and complain about that, but when voting time comes, we take it for granted that, well, my vote doesn't matter, or this is going to happen anyway. So let's emphasize how important it is.
That's very important. Just to give you a quick story, back in 1976, I was active. I finished my bachelor's degree and doing a master's degree and getting involved. And at the time, I'm sitting with then Mayor Angelo Martinelli. And I met with him, and he's talking to me about, you know, the community. I'm talking to him, and we're talking about how do we get the community more involved. And he said one quick way is get me resumes, get the community involved on boards, on commissions. That's a way in to become more involved. And at the time there was a vacancy on the Parks Board. And I said, well, I can serve. You know, I'm an advocate for youth. I'm an advocate for seniors in sports and so forth. I was a college wrestler and football and the whole bit. And then he tells me, you know, that's fine, and I'm interested in moving in that direction. Are you registered to vote? And at that time, honestly, I wasn't. And he said, you want me to appoint you? You're not even registered to vote? You know, that's really a mockery of the democracy and the system we live in. That same day, I went to the Board of Elections. I registered to vote. I came back and I said, Mr. Mayor, I'm now a registered voter. And that week he appointed me to the Parks Board. I served like for 7 years on the Parks Board at the time. Great experience. And the message to the public at large, don't complain when you don't practice your right to speak out and your right to vote. So anybody who's listening, you know, practice good democracy. Learn what the issues are, register to vote, and make sure you vote. Very often in primaries, like 5% of registered voters vote. That's terrible. You know, we need to develop a process where we make voter registration easier for individuals. We make sure that it's in multi-languages. We make sure that if somebody gets married, somebody passes away, somebody moves from one place to the other, that the Board of Election records are corrected on a regular basis. And that when there's petitions, everyone participates in getting out the vote and signing petitions and getting candidates of your choice on the ballot. That's democracy. If you don't practice that, then you're putting yourself at a big disadvantage when you talk about the overall picture of how can we improve. Voter registration is crucial.
So guys, exercise your rights. We are 3 weeks away, more or less, right?
November 6th.
November 6th. Come out and vote. Now, everyone says, on the first day I'm going to do this, this and that. So I'm not going to ask you on the first day, but I'm going to ask you, what are your priorities? What are the first few things, 2 or 3 things that you're going to tackle?
The first thing is educational funding. That deals with the funding we get per kid in Yonkers from Albany. And the second part of it, increasing the percentage of aid when we build schools and renovate facilities. Because right now, even though the state approved the $2 billion plan to build 2-3 new schools and renovations, it's at 70% now, Ru. And when people hear percentages, they sometimes miss the point. And I want the public to know, if this is a $2 billion project and the state is going to reimburse us 70%, right off the bat, you're talking about $600 million that Yonkers and Yonkers taxpayers are going to be responsible for. That becomes nearly impossible. Already there's an uproar that they raise taxes 6.2%, plus there's tax caps. So my point is, education, building our schools, small business, healthcare, these are priorities for me. Business developers, making sure they full share.
Now, you are a Yonkers man, and you care about Yonkers. Budget 2018, we're going to have layoffs. This is going to happen, that is going to happen. Tax went up 6.2. Well, we hear that budget 2019 is going to be the same old song.
It is.
Okay.
It is. Because this year, if you recall, we had to use $24 million in fund balance. That means money that the Board of Ed puts aside for emergencies. It's always a proper thing to do. We had to use the $24 million fund balance to avoid layoffs this year. The governor gave us between $8 and $9 million. That's why we were able to get by this year. The projections this year from the Board of Ed side is $56 million. You know, you have union contracts, you have increased costs, and the state hasn't really upped. People are saying, well, we'll go back to Albany and lobby like we always do to fill the void. We may have to still do that, but I think that's why I focus earlier on. There has to be immediate long-term changes. You can't have business as usual. That's why I propose making sure not only an emphasis on changing the formula, but on making sure developers, MGM included, they're coming into Yonkers, that they pay their fair share of taxes. So if we're able, for example, as an example, to get an extra $10 million of revenue from MGM to education in addition to the 19.6, to me as an educator, as a Yonkers guy, that would tell us, you know what, we just filled permanently a gap where now there's $10 million extra we can count on year after year. The developers that are looking to develop other sections of the waterfront and the Chicken Island parking lot, from what I understand, they're outbidding each other. So I would make sure we put a tax burden on them that makes it fair for them to live and grow in Yonkers. We want investment, we want to develop, we want to create jobs, but let's do it in a smart way. Let's make sure that we're not shortchanging Yonkers and our citizens.
Well, Mr. Nader, thank you for this interview, but probably there is a thing or two that I forgot to ask you.
Sure.
But you want to bring it up? Is there
Yeah.
anything that you'd like to bring it up to our audience? It's 40,000 plus on Yonkers Voice,
Sure.
about 15,000 plus on Yonkers Newswire. Both audience are listening to you. Anything you want to bring up that I forgot? This is your time.
Well, I just want to say I'm a Yonkers guy, 60 years. I feel I'm deserving of your support and votes. November 6th is the election. I appear on 6 lines. I don't think it's happened in Yonkers in many years. I'm the Democrat candidate, the Independence candidate, the Working Family, the Women's Equality, the Green Party, and the Reform Party. And I also have the support of the working men and women in Yonkers. I have practically unanimous labor support, the AFL-CIO 1199, the NICET teacher unions that represent the state and local. I feel my 40 years of involvement, hands-on experience, commitment to Yonkers, my experience as an attorney, as an educator for 40 years, gives me the skills to address the needs in Yonkers, I believe, better than any other person that's out there. So I urge the residents of Yonkers, put party affiliation aside, vote for the most qualified person, because your future and your future of your children and grandchildren depends on it. Thank you very much for your support.
Well, guys, in closing, I want to remind you again that Yonkers Voice does not support either party. We support you. This is information for you so you can make an educated decision on who is the best person for this job, regardless of which party they represent. So stay tuned for more.